Hey, what's up? This is No Huddle Fantasy Sports. It is Saturday afternoon, NFL Week 10, and we are talking all things DFS, including the top plays, the core plays you should be building your lineups around on the main slate, both DraftKings and FanDuel. So if you're looking to build some elite lineups this weekend, but you don't have much time to waste, and you want no gimmick, concise information on which players you should be rostering NFL Week 10 Fantasy Football DFS, you've come to the right place. Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports and my Week 10 NFL DFS Core Plays video. Of course, first and foremost, thank you for taking the time to find this channel, click on this video. And if you haven't done so already and you're looking to support the channel, support myself, support No Huddle Fantasy Sports, all you got to do is make sure you are subscribed to the channel and click that like button on this video. Before we begin, we always like to take a quick glance back, try to be transparent here. We're going to look at Week 9 in the recap and how we did. I mentioned I've been doing, over the last several weeks, 150 lineups. So this chart basically represents those guys and the percentage I owned across those 150 lineups. Anyone highlighted in general is a guy I recommended in my core plays. So you can see here, I simply am playing those guys that I'm recommending through the videos. Week 9 was pretty good. Nothing to write home about, but overall, it was a solid week. I had Matt Stafford as my number one quarterback, so every stack I had with him turned out pretty great. I owned him at 48%. I made an attempt, I mentioned it in the video, that I would be trying to get more exposure, a more concentrated exposure to a few guys. Matt Stafford certainly was that guy, and it paid off. Unfortunately, on the flip side, in that same game, I did play a ton. In fact, 51%. My highest owned player was Danny Amendola, who did not do much, so that sucked. That he really shit the bed there. Jalen Samuels was a great pick, albeit owned highly across the board. He was a good play. Josh Jacobs was a great pivot off a lot of running backs. He ended up turning out a really good game. Allen Robinson against that Eagles secondary. It's really Trubinsky, but Allen Robinson really struggled. Dalvin Cook. Hindsight should have went more McCaffrey. Jameis Winston was the other quarterback I focused a ton of lineups around, and he had a great game. Cameron Brate got 0, so that was just awful. Devontae Parker, great value pick there. Chris Godwin, he didn't kill you, but again, relative to his price, not the best performance. Christian McCaffrey just doesn't matter. The dude's insane, continues to rock it every single week. Should have just attempted to not play as much Dalvin Cook and fit as much McCaffrey in as possible. Fortunately, I only got to 14% with him. That was the biggest mistake probably of my Week 9 lineups. And then finally, Eric Ebron didn't do much. But you can see here, overall a decent week, a lot of green across the board. A couple guys really shit the bed, but overall still a good week. And I hope you guys were able to utilize that video and come out with similar results. If you did, let me know in the comments below. But hey, the real reason you're here is for the Week 10 core plays. Those guys I'll be sticking to this week. Let's keep rolling from Week 9. We've had 2 good weeks in a row, so let's continue to do that. My 2 quarterbacks I'm focusing on, Kyler Murray for Arizona and Matt Ryan for, it should be Atlanta. I don't know why I did not correct that. That pisses me off, but hey, whatever. So Kyler Murray, I think he's going to be one of the highest owned quarterbacks this week, but nonetheless in a great spot at 6,500 on DraftKings, 77 on FanDuel. He's an away underdog at Tampa Bay. It's a 50.5 over-under, so a great total to focus on. And again, it's a close spread at 4.5, so the game could turn into a shootout. But checking out Murray here, he is coming off a solid, not great, but solid performance against one of the most elite defenses in the league right now, San Francisco. He threw for 241 yards and 2 touchdowns, so you like to see that. He does have a decent floor with his rushing ability. I think you can expect around 5 rushing attempts and 30 to 40 yards on average. He's had some higher games, of course, some lower games, but I think that's what you can kind of expect, maybe an additional 3 to 4 points with his ability to rush the ball, and that offers a decent floor for him. But more importantly for this week, it is an elite quarterback matchup against that Tampa Bay defense. Tampa Bay, of course, is a top 5 matchup for the quarterback position. They're giving up 291 passing yards per game on average and anywhere from 23 to 24 fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. So again, just an elite matchup. He's a good price, especially on DraftKings at 6,500. Next up is Matt Ryan for Atlanta. I think Matt Ryan right now is just too undervalued. I do realize he's coming off an injury, but nonetheless, 6,100 on DraftKings, 7,500 on FanDuel. Those should not be prices for Matt Ryan each and every week. I don't care who he's playing. Like, honestly, if you look at his price, you have Brian Hoyer, who's only $200 less than him, and then you have ahead of him Jared Goff, Josh Allen. I just think he's mispriced right now. But he is an away dog at New Orleans, a 51.5 over/under. I believe that's the highest on the slate. He's a huge underdog at 13.5 points. So I think you can expect them to just air the ball out the entire game if they're going to keep up. And the big thing here, at least the biggest reason I like Matt Ryan this week, is if you focus on this year, in every game he has played, he has broken the 300-yard mark. In every game he's been healthy. So if you're excluding the injured week, he has broken the 300-yard, or on DraftKings, he has gotten you a bonus in every single game he's played. Yet he is priced below Josh Allen at $6,100 on DraftKings. It just blows my mind, and I think he just is standing out to me as an incredible value. And of course, we can't forget that Matt Ryan and New Orleans have a ton of experience against one another. In 2018, Matt Ryan had a ton of success. He destroyed New Orleans through the air, both home and away. 335 passing yards on average and 2.5+ touchdowns against that New Orleans defense. I believe that includes like a 4 or 5 touchdown game. So again, ton of experience against that New Orleans defense, ton of success against them. You got to like that too. And although New Orleans defense has improved, they still are a pretty solid matchup for quarterbacks. So again, for his price, I think Matt Ryan stands out as an incredible value. I love him. I'm going to get a ton of exposure to Matt Ryan for Atlanta this week. Moving on to the running back position here, I'm basically going to leave this first spot saved indefinitely for Christian McCaffrey, Carolina. He's 10-5 on both sites. Very, very expensive, but still worth that price tag. So if you can fit him, go ahead and do it. Not that you need anything other than the name Christian McCaffrey as a reason to play him. Green Bay's defense is very favorable to running backs. They're currently surrendering 115 rushing yards per game to running backs, and that's currently equating to 25 fantasy points per game on FanDuel, 29 fantasy points per game on DraftKings. I do believe, it's pretty obvious though, Christian McCaffrey is a better value on FanDuel. He's almost a lock on FanDuel because of the fact you have $10,000 worth more of salary. It's also amazing to see just how efficient McCaffrey has been with his touches. So you have this extremely efficient per touch running back, and then he's also averaging 25+ touches a game. It's just a perfect setup for Christian McCaffrey week in and week out. But as of right now, don't be scared. If you can fit him, try to do it. The only thing I would caution here is he does have an injury tag right now. Keep your eye on that. Next up, I have Marlon Mack here for Indianapolis. He kind of fits that mold. He's a big home favorite at 12.5 versus the Miami Dolphins. But more importantly, Miami is a top 5 running back matchup on paper. They are currently allowing 134 rushing yards per game and anywhere from 27 to 30 fantasy points per game to running backs. Again, depending on the site you're playing on. And of course, if you dive into it a little bit deeper, that 134 rushing yards per game that they are currently allowing to running backs, that is 10 more yards than the second worst team in the NFL. And of course, Marlon Mack himself, if the circumstances are right, he can get a heavy workload on the ground. We've seen him get 58 carries over the last 3 games, although he hasn't done much with it. The matchup this week is much better. And for Indianapolis, they're seeing a lot of injuries on the offense. Jacoby Brissett is currently rolled out, so they'll have a backup quarterback and Brian Hoyer in. T.Y. Hilton and other receivers are all banged up. They'll be missing time. I think the circumstances spell a big game on the ground for Marlon Mack against a very, very weak defense. So I like Marlon Mack this week. Next up is probably my favorite play on the slate, and that's David Montgomery for Chicago. He, again, fits that mold of a running back, a home-favored running back. Chicago playing at home against Detroit. They are 2.5-point favorites, but more importantly, Detroit is giving up the most fantasy points per game to running backs this season. That currently stands at over 29 points on FanDuel and 33+ fantasy points on average on DraftKings given up to the running back position. And if you want more evidence of that, if you just take a quick look back at the last couple of weeks for Detroit, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, Dalvin Cook, all of them had monster games week in, week out against Detroit. So Detroit just continues to give up massive totals to the running back position. And I believe David Montgomery is primed to take advantage of that at home for Chicago. The big scare this year was David Montgomery. Was on a lot of people's boards, but just wasn't getting the usage. But the good news is over the last 2 weeks, between weeks 8 and 9, his usage has jumped to 73%. So he's on the field for the majority of the snaps. And for all of that and all of those considerations, he's a fair price at only $5,300 on DraftKings and $64 on FanDuel. So I like David Montgomery, one of my favorite plays on the slate. And finally here, I don't have necessarily a value play, but again, I'm trying to pay down at quarterback and other positions to fit in as many of these good running backs as I possibly can. But I love Devin Singletary for Buffalo this week. I've loved him all year, but he just has been haunted by the skeleton of Frank Gore that still exists on the field and gets a ton of snaps. But the good news is, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen Singletary's usage jump to 65%. And at $5,000 on DraftKings, $6,700 on FanDuel, I can live with that. If he's going to get 20 touches a game like he has over the last couple of weeks, I want Devin Singletary this week against Cleveland. He is playing on the road, but we've seen him get big usage both on the ground and through the air, so he is a dual threat back that can continue to stay on the field if they should go down. But more importantly, the matchup is pretty elite in my mind against the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland's defense has been getting wrecked by running backs all season. Currently, they're a bottom 5 team in terms of yardage. Or yards per carry given up, and that sits at 4.9. So Devin Singletary, give me those 15, 20 touches this week against such a weak Cleveland run defense. I like Singletary for Buffalo. And moving on to our wide receiver position here, the first guy I want to pull out is Michael Thomas for New Orleans. I do realize they are huge home favorites playing against the Atlanta Falcons, but that doesn't worry me because regardless of the situation, regardless of who's at quarterback even, Michael Thomas gets his week in and week out. He's very efficient, and he still gets a ton of targets, even in games in which they go up by a lot. He has a great floor. He's going to get you at least 10 fantasy points with an upside of 40. And of course, Atlanta presents a top 5 matchup for the wide receiver position. So just a great spot for Michael Thomas. Next up, I'm going right back to the well here with Chris Godwin for Tampa Bay in a game against Arizona in which it should be a shootout, high-scoring, close spread game. Arizona does present a solid matchup for receivers, but they're especially weak against slot receivers where Godwin mostly plays. And more importantly, we kind of know where the ball was going to go with Jameis Winston in that Tampa Bay passing attack. It's very predictable, and we love predictable volume in fantasy football, so I'm going right back to the well here with Chris Godwin for Tampa Bay. On the other side of the ball there, I do like Christian Kirk for Arizona. Keep in mind, he's probably going to be highly owned this week because he's a great price on both sites. He's $5,200 on DraftKings, $5,700 on FanDuel. Tampa Bay just is an elite matchup. They're number 1 in terms of fantasy points given up to the wide receiver position on average each and every week. And Christian Kirk, when he's played, he's averaged nearly 9 targets a game. So again, you're getting volume at a cheap price tag against a very weak defense, pairing him with your quarterback here, Christian Kirk for Arizona. And finally here, if you're looking to pay all the way down at the wide receiver position, this is a stretch. It is very risky, but I'm looking at Russell Gage for Atlanta. He should be the guy that slides into Mohamed Sanu's slot role. And if you want to talk about New Orleans and their defense, they're pretty good against outside receivers, but where they do really struggle, they're very, very weak against inside slot receivers. Russell Gage apparently should fill that role that Sanu was in, and for $3,400 on DraftKings and $4,700 on FanDuel, you could see some decent upside and some decent value here for a guy that basically no one's talking about. Again, some serious risk here, but if you're looking to pay all the way down, he's a guy I have my eye on. And finally here, everybody's favorite position, and the position I absolutely hate this week, tight ends. In all likelihood, I'm going to be paying way down this week for tight ends, but should I venture up the salary range a little bit, I'm going with Mark Andrews for Baltimore. He's coming off a brutal week 9 versus New England, where he was basically schemed out, but I think that's more of an exception than what we can come to expect. That's kind of what New England does. They take away some of your best players. But before that, Andrews has been one of the best tight ends in all of football. He's one of the favorite targets of Lamar Jackson, and he's playing against a very, very weak Cincinnati defense this week. A team he's played already this year. In week 7, he had 8 targets, 6 receptions, and 99 yards. He's averaging 10 to 14 fantasy points per game. You can come to expect anywhere from 8 to 10 targets. Even in a blowout, I think you can reasonably expect that from Mark Andrews. And currently this week, the big thing with him is Pro Football Focus has him as the number 1 tight end matchup. So if that's something you consider, Mark Andrews in a great spot. The only real risk here is the fact that the game should and likely will turn into a blowout at some point. And the other guy I want to mention here is everybody's favorite, the biggest letdown or one of the biggest letdowns in season-long fantasy football, and that's O.J. Howard for Tampa Bay. Really, I don't need to talk about a lot here. It's pretty simple. I take tight ends against Arizona, tight ends that actually are involved in the passing game against Arizona week in and week out. They are by far the weakest team in terms of defending the tight end position. O.J. Howard is crazy cheap at $3,300 on DraftKings. It's simply matchup plus price. It saves me a lot of money and helps me, again, fit in expensive running backs. And if you want to think about it a little bit more in depth, it gets you some contrarian exposure to that Tampa Bay-Arizona game. So O.J. Howard somehow landing for the death of me on my core plays list. And so that wraps up our core plays for Week 10 NFL DFS. Other considerations, some guys I want to point out here really quickly. Jameis Winston for Tampa Bay, in a great spot. I went with Murray because I think Winston is going to be if not the highest owned quarterback, one of the highest owned quarterbacks. I was playing a little bit of an ownership thing there, but I do love Jameis Winston equally for Tampa Bay. Jalen Samuels for Pittsburgh. I have him asterisked here because James Conner is now ruled out, and we had Edmonds who was injured. Edmonds will play, so that kind of drops Samuels a little bit, not a lot. He's still a good play, especially on DraftKings where he gets a ton of usage in the passing game. Kalen Ballage, if I even pronounced his name right, I'm not recommending him as a core play, but he is probably the best low price guy you can go with. He should get a heavy workload for Miami. And by heavy, I mean, I don't know, he'll get all the handoffs, which could be like 10. So just take that for a grain of salt. But he is a starting running back that's super cheap this week. Devontae Adams, he's been getting a ton of targets. He looks okay since he came back from his injury. He stands out as a guy. He's only, I think, 6,900 on DraftKings, so that's too cheap for Devontae Adams. He gets red zone usage. He gets a ton of targets. You got to like Devontae Adams for Green Bay. Finally here, Devontae Parker. We saw Williams go down on the injured reserve, so there's more opportunity, more targets to go Parker's way. And in one huge breath, that wraps up our NFL Week 10 DFS Core Plays. I hope you guys enjoy these videos. I hope this helps you. Let me know in the comments below if you have any other recommendations or if you disagree with any of these calls. If you guys are interested in any more research, I will link it above my last video. The video I put out earlier in the week is about matchups, defense versus position. I publish full-blown 1 through 32 NFL teams ranked, defense versus position spreadsheets. All of that is linked in the video that I'm hopefully linking above here. So go ahead, check that out. Go to the description section if you want those tools. And finally, I've loved doing these videos. I really am having a lot of fun putting these videos out week in and week out, talking with you guys in the community. And this channel continues to grow. But there is a ton of research, a ton of time, editing, video, recording, all that stuff that I'm learning as we go along. But more importantly, it does take a ton of my time. I don't do this full time. I'm a regular guy. So if you want to support me, if you want to support No Huddle Fantasy Sports, all I literally need you to do is make sure you subscribe down below and hit that like button on these videos. It would mean a lot to me as I continue to see this community and this channel grow. Outside of that, thank you guys for all the support. Good luck this weekend, and I hope to see you atop the leaderboards.